Welcome to Noon Dish. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Don Callahan, always sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. Don, you were late getting in the waiting room. Tell
I
me why
know,
you were.
and I just got news that I'm probably going to hop off here earlier than normal. Not maybe 12:45 ish.
Is that a work related or baby
It is.
related
It
or
is.
all of the above?
It is work related. You say women related?
Baby
Oh,
related.
baby, no. They actually. I'm actually home alone.
That's a
Wife,
first.
Katie took her and a baby went up to Virginia to see some family for a couple of days.
Nice. So you can take naps and eat
Well, I
crackers
got
in bed and all that
still got
stuff.
to deal with my son and all of that, and then I'm probably going to go to visit my daughter tomorrow and go to the ECU game.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
Don Callahan in a full day's work, and we're only on Wednesday. I tweeted earlier like a busy Thursday, and it's like people called me out, and I'm like, look, it feels like these days are flying by, but news of the day before we even get into anything: Amir Brown, running back from Roseville. Which is a stacked Roseville team, though they hadn't done as good as they normally do, at least record wise. Decommits from North Carolina 2027 class. Don, surprising, your thoughts, just general take on a
Um,
decommit.
Not super surprising, you hate to kind of be like the kid probably shouldn't have committed because I don't have all the information, and these are life decisions that I really don't have a whole lot of say or should be saying anything. But it's the same thing with Xavion Griffin Hayes when he committed to North Carolina, almost exactly a year before Amir Brown did. Is that they both committed before they probably were ready to make a commitment, and Amir clearly has some more visits that he wants to take. I knew North Carolina was in a really good spot with him when he committed. And I believe today North Carolina remains in a very good spot. I was just messaging with him last night. And although he didn't mention anything about what he was thinking at that time, but you know, I was a little surprised when he committed just because I did feel like he had some more visits that he wanted to take. And we had actually reported about a month ago that he had scheduled a visit with Notre Dame for this coming weekend. So I would guess that decommitment had something to do with that. Either North Carolina said, hey, if you're going to visit another school, you need to decommit, or Notre Dame said, hey, we're not going to host you unless you decommit, or he just felt like that was the most fair move to make before he traveled to South Bend. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me all that much. I think in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't matter because I still think North Carolina is in a very, very strong position. And whether he was committed or not, if he's visiting Notre Dame, if he likes it up there, that's going to impact him whether he's a commitment or not. So yeah. So not super surprised because I kind of knew he was going to take some visits and kind of didn't feel like he was like this strong commitment anyway. But yeah, I mean, and it's just from an optics standpoint, doesn't look great, for North Carolina, especially with all the stuff that's happening. But I don't think it's like a big deal, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And look, he's probably going to like Notre Dame. I like going to Notre Dame. Sean Crawley digging on Notre Dame in chat, but that's a fun trip and it's a fun environment. Now, I don't do cold, so that's a problem.
So my I think I've talked about this before. My family sports group chat. I'm Irish Catholic. My family's Irish Catholic, so Notre Dame is kind of like the pinnacle for a lot of them. And I deal with Notre Dame fans more than what you believe. So yeah, I definitely understand, Sean. I'm sure Sean, living in Pennsylvania, deals with a lot of Notre Dame fans also.
It is, yeah. I mean, let me just ask the basic question though. Why, in general, do kids commit or want to commit that far in advance? Especially this day and age. Is it still a placeholder type thing for them or what's
No, I don't think anyone ever really views it as a placeholder. I think it's like you kind of fall in love and then you kind of just want to make a move. You know what I mean? And some people like the attention that's around it. In some situations, the coaching staff kind of talks you into it. I don't think that was the case here with Amir Brown, but I think, he just always felt very strongly about North Carolina. Roseville, that group of guys makes a lot of visits to Chapel Hill. That's and a lot of people have mentioned how some of the high school coaches in the state of North Carolina aren't too happy with how their players are being recruited by UNC. That's not the case with Roseville. Coach Rack has a very good relationship with the staff at UNC. They really do a good job of taking care of him and his players. And as a result, him and his players have made a ton of visits to Chapel Hill. UNC is definitely a school that Amir has visited more than anywhere else. So I don't know. I would not, for my kid, I would tell him to kind of hold off. Let's get these visits out of the way. But, I think he just kind of just fell into the excitement and wanted to make a move, not really kind of thinking long-term, like, hey, how's this going to look when I want to take some other visits?
Makes sense there. Talking to Don Callahan on the Noon Dish, we jumped right into the Amir Brown decommitment. We did not talk about was it 2 weeks ago we did a show? Who do you remember the chat MVP of the last show?
We're going to go. I'm sorry. We're going to go with we're going to go with Preston from Greensboro. I think he was a chat MVP at some point. But I think I am starting a running list. So I'm going to give it to Preston. Old, reliable, can't go wrong. Between him and Sean Crowley, I mean, will we even have a Noon Dish without those guys? So let's give it to Preston, who is he even? He's
in the chat. And he's talking about roughing the snapper. I was at that game. I was at that game, and even the Notre Dame fans sitting around us were laughing about that roughing snapper call. Of course, I've never seen it called before. It was called in that game and certainly made a difference. And shout out to everybody. We're getting bigger and bigger crowds here on the Noon Dish in Wednesday. Maybe it's because of how the program's going. The product on the field has had people turn more to the recruiting side of it. As Don Callahan literally works the phones as we're talking. And Don, feel free to break any news. Ryan Z in the chat says USC Notre Dame, great top 25 matchup. I went to the 10th anniversary game of the Bush Push, and that was pretty epic environment there in South Bend and Notre Dame Stadium. So anyway, let's turn to today.
Mm-hmm.
How much of the past couple weeks has made your job more interesting, but also affected things? Has it affected things in any way, positive, negative, any of that, when dealing with the recruiting aspect of the program, when the product on the field, frankly, is not been good? And that's a generous statement to say not been good, given what we've seen. But what's it been like for Don Callahan the last couple of weeks?
Well, as you know, we were fully planning on doing a Noon Dish a week ago. And because of the uncertainty, we didn't want to be on the air and then something completely unexpected happen and not be prepared to kind of handle it. So that's one example of how it's impacted things. For me, I think like you, a lot of phone calls from parents, that not this past Sunday, the Sunday before, I spent 2.5 hours on the phone with one parent, just kind of going through their thoughts and sharing information with me. I know a lot of people have gotten on to the WREL guy. What's his name? Young guy.
Pat Welter.
Yeah.
Reported.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those, I don't know if I could think of I guess there's been some others, but this is one of those cases where you don't have to do a whole lot of digging. A lot of the information kind of comes to you, and I know that you've been in the same boat, and probably more than myself, with just sometimes, there's some nights I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to bed, and the phone rings, or I was driving someplace and I thought, okay, I'm going to get this podcast episode out of the way, and then someone calls and you're on the phone for the entire ride. So that part of it's been crazy. Talking to these recruits, the commitments, getting their thoughts on things. I mean, that's a typical, I guess, part of the job. Only obviously the questions and the conversation as a whole are way different than normal. Just kind of seeing their reaction to the certain things, which in general, I know you didn't exactly ask this, but I think it goes back to one of the items we always talk about is that these are high school kids who aren't on message boards, and they're on social media, but they're on different social media than us. They're only on Twitter for recruiting purposes, but otherwise they're talking to their friends on Snapchat and Instagram and all that and whatever else there is out there. And so they can be a little oblivious to what is going on, but definitely Wednesday, with all the different reports that were going out, definitely hit their screens. And some of them are a little bit surprised by the information because, again, they're not on the message boards like a lot of people who are listening to this and aren't just consuming it every single day. So a little bit of surprise from some of those recruits.
Yeah, I mean, I had an interview with one of the Olympic sport coaches that run first part of next week, and he talked about the phone aspect that everybody has and how at some point you got to put it down and all that. And to your point, the high school kids mostly are on different aspects, but when it started really spreading like wildfire last Wednesday, it was everywhere and you could not avoid it. And, when you talk to young people, high school recruits mainly, and you hear about, and you ask them, what do they think about that? I mean, what's the general, you don't have to go into specifics unless you want to. You've put some articles out on Inside Carolina on the premium side of things, but what's the general, I mean, what do they say? Like, okay.
Yeah. So we ran actual stories on Trayshawn Ruffin, Xavier Griffin Hayes, and Travis Burgess. And I texted with several others, those were the main ones that had seen that, like, that actually spoke to Belichick. Most of the other recruits spoke to their position coach. There was actually a couple who didn't talk to anybody, but just to kind of get a feel for their mindset. And I think a lot of them just kind of brushed it off. There was definitely some concern, like what is going on. But I think once they had a coach say to them, Coach Belichick's not going anywhere, and then they're like, all right, cool. Because really what it comes down to, I mean, everyone wants to talk about how the season's going and, in all the turmoil, or I guess the noise that's going around in the football office. But to the recruits, for the most part, they only care if it's going to affect the people they expect to be in Chapel Hill when they get there, for the most part. Now, going whatever the record is going to end up being this season, was it 2-3 now? Is that right?
Yeah, it's 2-3 now, and Michael in the chat says 2-10, baby, which is a distinct possibility, but it's not going to be as good as folks had hoped. We'll put it that way.
They're probably not going to reach the win total, but I think that definitely does not help with recruits. But I think ultimately what you end up seeing with commitments is that they've already, in a lot of cases, and again, we're dealing with so many different personalities, different backgrounds. So, and I'm trying to paint a broad brush here, but in a lot of situations, the kids have already kind of grabbed on and said, okay, this is my school. I'm going to defend it for the most part. But yes, I mean, if some school comes in and says, hey, we love to have you here, I mean, in some situations that might change recruitments. Obviously the way the season's going is not helping North Carolina, but I think for the most part with the commits, they've already latched onto this program as theirs, and they're more defensive of it than anything else. And they just want to make sure what they agreed to with when they commit it, meaning who's going to be coaching them, particularly Belichick is going to be there. And that's really most of their priority.
We've certainly, we're talking with Don Callahan here on the Noon Dish, of course, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Don, we've certainly covered ad nauseum many of the issues that this staff has, self-inflicted or not, has dealt with on the recruiting trail, both transfer and all that. But in your view, and I might be putting you on the spot, but that's what I do.
It is what you do.
In your view, have you seen an improvement on how things are handled?
Yeah,
and that's a very broad, general question.
Yeah, I've seen an improvement. I'm still seeing a lot of areas that need improvement, and I think last Wednesday was one of them. We talk about all the time how in college football, probably more than any other part of life, perception is reality. And even though Belichick wasn't, or he says, and we believe from our reporting that Belichick was not talking to UNC about a buyout, the fact that was out there, some of those recruits or some of those commits thought that might be the reality. And the fact that it took the staff up until 7:00 that night to reach out to commits, most of them, I think Travis Burgess said that he heard from them a couple hours before, but most of them didn't hear from UNC until 7:00 that night. That just shows just a lack of understanding of college football and the fact that, with each passing hour, you're kind of hurting situations with those commitments, and those phone calls need to have happened much sooner than that to kind of get ahead of it. And so that's just one element where I feel like maybe they learn from that. Like, hey, we need to get ahead of these stories. I think they're so used to we're going to ignore the noise outside and we're just going to keep on practicing and coaching. But in college football, you have to worry about the noise outside because a lot of people believe what's outside to be true if you do not come out and say that's not true. I know it sounds weird, but I mean, it's how it is. You have got to be able to control the narrative. And if you're not talking, you're not controlling the narrative. If you're not allowing your SIDs to talk, you're not controlling the narrative.
I mean, I 100% agree. And that's not just a Belichick thing or this staff's thing. It's always been an interesting dynamic to me that Carolina, over the course of the last, probably since the NCAA thing, back in 10, has had trouble controlling the narratives around the big sports. And I say the big sports, the big revenue sports, basketball, football. And that is what's got to improve. And that's part of the thing, they talked about they've got a lot of areas of improvement and people on the inside say they need to improve. And, we reported it and wrote in a column that those are things these are aspects that we're talking about. These are real-time aspects. And to your point about some of the reporting, there were a lot of people out there that wanted Inside Carolina to, refute what was being said. And it's like, how do you refute a negative?
Yeah.
From our side, if it's not happening.
Well, we were reporting nothing's going on, and it's just like, how do you, when someone else is reporting something's going on, like, yeah, it drives. I've dealt with that before. Someone will come to me or on the message board and say, hey, so-and-so is reporting this. What do you have to say about that? Well, that's their report. You have a question about that, go ask them. I'm not reporting that. And maybe I just don't know what's going on and I'm just, completely out of the loop. Or maybe there's a reason why I haven't reported it because it's not, legit. So I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're right. And I mean, I think that's the needle that everybody tries to thread here. And I think it's an important discussion. But to your point, on UNC's side, Yeah, you don't want to have to deal with all the noise, but you got to deal with it. Like you said, you got to jump out in front of it, and that is where you see teams, you see individuals, you see all sorts of people that are really good at it, controlling the narrative around themselves. And I think that's where Carolina can certainly get better across the board. And they have in some regards, and obviously it's still work in progress. Don, when you and Dwayne in the chat says, "Can you teach an old dog new tricks?" Jason made a point last week on the game plan that even an old dog can learn new tricks if they are willing to learn them. And that is the key. It's not, I'm old, I can learn. Don's not quite as old, but he can still learn if we're willing to learn. But if I'm stuck in the ways, then I'm going to be stuck in the ways, and it doesn't matter what you try. That is the rub. That is the challenge for North Carolina going forward, program wise. Recruiting wise, Don, we've continued, and I think it was really the first time I heard Lombardi say it, that they want to build through the high school ranks. I'm sure he said it before, but I heard it the other night. They're at 35, 36 commitments for the 26 class. I mean, are we really pushing this thing past 40? Is that really a thing? Especially when you add in now the James Franklin firing in Penn State. You know, I say,
Yeah,
Carolina's interested.
You
I
always
said a
have to.
lot.
Yeah, no, and I'm trying to be careful with. So I listen to everything Michael Lombardi says and take notes, but I've learned you kind of have to take a lot of it with a grain of salt, and some of it, I'm sure that from their actions, it wouldn't surprise me if they're trying to add as many to this class as possible. So yeah, I can see that could be their goal. I worry about that goal though, because of, first, let me just say, I'm a huge believer in North Carolina, its best path to building a healthy program that is regularly competing for ACC championships is through the high school ranks. So I'm in 100% agreement with Michael Lombardi on that. And yes, you're right. I do not recall him. I think the letter that he sent out to boosters a week ago or 2 weeks, whenever that was probably the first time that I can recall him mentioning that specifically. But he says a lot of things, so maybe I missed it along the way somewhere. So we're in agreement with that. There's two things with that. One, the problem with doing this specifically with this coaching staff is the ages. And I know nobody wants to hear it, but I mean, if we're being realistic, and someone asked me this question on the Ask Don thread last night about, let's say, the 26 class, these players contributing, what's the soonest we can expect them to contribute? The reality is most recruits, and yes, there are plenty of exceptions, most need about 2 years of development on campus, meaning that probably by year 3 is when they're going to be able to actually contribute, seriously contribute. You add 3 years to 73, you're getting to 76. And I'm talking about Belichick's age. Not good. The other aspect of that is the signing of 2 full classes in one class. One of the benefits I feel like for building through the high school ranks is that you are bringing stability. If you're doing it class after class after class, you're bringing stability to your program. And there's a lot of benefits for stability. I think when you sign 40, you are increasing the turnover likelihood. I mean, all classes are going to have some sort of turnover, but I think the more that you sign, the more you have to keep happy. The harder it gets, the larger they are, the larger the class is, and the more turnover you're going to have, which basically eats into that stability to where you probably aren't going to get the benefits of that stability. So I'm not a huge fan of it. I also think that there is some sort of law of diminishing returns with a class. I don't know what that number is. I don't think it's 40. I think it's much closer to 25. Meaning that there comes a point where when you're just adding guys to your class and they're not long-term helping your program. They're just adding bodies and actually could be harmful later on. And really this whole like revolving door of players leaving the program, that doesn't help recruiting at all. Nobody's going to look at that and say, okay, that's good. And so that's part of it too. Hopefully
But
I
that's
answered
not
all your questions.
Yeah, but that's not a Carolina specific thing. Revolving doors are not. I mean, sure,
Well, I
it's
think
different when the coaching staff changes over, but
it feels like it's a lot. If you're bringing in, well, it feels like there's been a lot more revolving door underneath this coaching staff. And if you're bringing in 40, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but if you're bringing in 40 in this class and then going to sign a decent sized portal class, which again, he hasn't specifically addressed numbers wise, so I don't know what he's looking at numbers wise for the portal class, you got to expect a massive amount of players leaving this roster, after more than most programs.
yeah, I don't know though. I mean, yeah, certainly the roster turnover is a problem, but I don't necessarily think it's Carolina exclusive when you have a change, and for whatever reason, whether they want to get their guys in, and I'm pushing back on you.
Yeah, that's
simply
fine.
because
No, I don't have any issue with pushing back.
But I see, it is across the country where you have massive turnovers. Everybody talks about Colorado and all that stuff. My issue with it, and we can move on from the topic, but my issue is you can't really argue that not having guys that should have been there is a problem when you haven't really done all you can to keep guys there that were going to be there.
Yeah.
You're gonna have natural roster turnover when things
Yes.
change, especially when you go from such far opposite spectrums of how things are done. But then there's that aspect of, well, if we push guys out, or if you push guys out, or tell guys, look, you're just not going to play, you might as well leave. And then you come around and say, well, we only have one guy out of this recruiting class left. That is my beef with the whole thing is don't create chaos. A lot of people, and it's really more in different aspects of life, but a lot of people are really good at creating chaos and then claiming to be the person that's going to fix it. It doesn't really work. You can't really do that in college sports, because if everybody leaves, then you're in a situation where the entire new roster's on you from day one, which is pretty much the case here. I would think you agree.
Mm-hmm.
And then you live with the results. And if they're not good, then you're going to take heat for it, which is exactly what we've seen in Chapel Hill. Anyway.
I agree with you. I think we're talking about different things, but I agree with you. And I think we're actually on the same page. I think we're in agreement that they should be trying to stabilize this roster. I mean, attrition is going to happen. It's been happening before the transfer portal and before they altered all the transfer rules and everything. So that's going to happen. But I think trying to stabilize a roster from year to year is key, and taking care of those people is super helpful. And I think that if you bringing in 40 players is going to cause you to lose a whole lot of players, then that might not be the best way to go about it. That's just my feeling on it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. You got to take care of who's there first. And that again is part of my beef is you take care of who's already on the roster, because they've got skin in the game and they've had skin in the game, and then you build out.
Yes.
And then you go from there, but you can't just flush everybody out.
Correct.
And empty the building, for a lack of a better way, and then expect it to be easy.
And it feels like a little bit that there are certain guys, there are certain guys on this roster, I'm talking about true freshmen, that highly ranked guys that it wouldn't shock me if they're flushed out.
Yeah.
And
there's the problem.
Yeah. And to give up on a kid who has only been there for less than a year, if you're going to do that, if you're going to give up on a kid every single, after just, spring and summer practices and say, okay, this doesn't work, let's push him out, let's try to get the new one. That's not going to work. And there's definitely some, I don't know, it's one of those things where we don't have a whole, I don't feel super comfortable. I think where I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know, but and I'll bail you out here. I mean, the issue is, if one of your main things is to develop players,
Yes.
well, then develop them
Mm-hmm.
and give them an opportunity. And this is across the board. Give these guys an opportunity to get better. And then if they don't, but you have to get the development aspect of it, and you don't get the development aspect of it in months. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think not when we're we're talking about the huge difference between 17 and 18-year-old children versus 23, 24, now some 25 and even older grown men.
Yeah.
I mean, and so that therein lies the rub. And I think those are part of the things, and in the reporting and in my column, those are part of the aspects, the course correction of the program that have to be addressed to make your point relevant and your point of some roster stability.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it is a constant turnover, which I understand why at times, but if you're going to keep the constant turnover, then you're never going to have chemistry. You're
Mm-hmm.
never going to have a solid locker room.
Mm-hmm.
You're never going to have consistency on the field. And then you don't have anybody to champion your program,
Mm-hmm.
because if I'm a transfer in from somewhere else and I come in and I have a bad situation, I'm not going to be out there telling people how great it is. And those are the type, and there circles all the way back to Don Callahan's favorite point. What is it, Don? Relationships.
Oh, relationships. Yes.
And
yes.
we talked about that.
Why is Fernando Mendoza at Indiana? Mm-hmm. Because, do you know why?
Because his brother.
His brother was recruited by the coach there. The coach has the relationship with the family. Yep. Why is John Mateer at Oklahoma?
OC.
The OC left Washington State, right?
Yeah.
Washington State, and wanted to be where he had the relationship.
I mean, and it's simple. It is just not. And this is something that I'm going to give Don Callahan props, because he's been talking about it since day one, especially since I've been doing these shows, but especially this year, is that the relationship aspect of college football matters as much as anything else.
Yes.
And that is where this coaching staff, in my opinion, has failed the most, is that aspect of relationships with players. They are not video games. Mm-hmm. It is not NFL free agency and all those things. And I think that is where the improvement needs to be, and which is why I asked you about improvement to start the show. So anyway, Butch Green in the chat says the downfall is players getting paid in college. Well, I can tell you that I was in college 30-some years ago, and they were getting paid then.
The money is definitely a factor.
But the money is a factor when you allow it to become such a big part of what you're trying to do, mm-hmm. and you wipe out the relationship aspect of it.
Yeah.
I think I'm not going to go work somewhere where I can't stand. Now, you pay me enough. You paid me $5 million. I'll probably do anything you want me to do.
And you'll work with Ross Martin.
I would. Everybody has limits, but if you don't like the people you work with, the money only exacerbates the problem.
Yes,
and so if you don't have the relationship, and we see it on a day-to-day basis at regular jobs. If you go work at Don's favorite Sheets or Buc-ee's, if you went to Buc-ee's and you made $5 an hour, but everybody loved you, and then there was somebody that was a butthole making $10 an hour, it's going to be miserable. So anyway, we digress, but I think it's a
Yeah, but
relevant
just to
discussion.
and the improvement, and I guess to tie it together a little bit, Roseville is actually a very good example of improvement, where it seems that the coaching staff has definitely invested not just in offering those players, but in establishing relationships, particularly with the 27 class. I think there were some missteps there with the Griffin Hayes brothers, even though they end up committing. But UNC is doing a really good job with those 27 recruits, and that contributed to Amir Brown at one point being a commitment. And Marquise Bryant, UNC is very high for him, and that's because of the work that North Carolina has done. So I think we're seeing that a little bit, and being smarter about it in spending more of their efforts closer to home. As I said,
Yes.
it's working smarter, not harder, by trying to get the recruits who are closer to campus.
I agree with that. And because that's important, and we've talked about this too, and that's important because if I'm around the corner from where I grew up, I'm more likely to stay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more likely to have loyalty to that school, not one individual person. And then when everything hits the fan, I'm more likely to have belief that this is the place, rather than if I'm halfway across the country and everybody says come home. That's another one of the issues. But anyway, Don, I know you said you had to get out of here a little bit early, so I want to let you do that, but I don't want us to quit without giving you an opportunity to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've driven the bus here, and I
No,
want to
you've been
make
doing a
sure.
great job. So there was a question in there.
And something I realized here, hold on, I cut you off finally.
It's okay.
No, what's cool about what we see, and people are posting in the YouTube chat if you're on the radio or listening to this on the podcast feed, and it pops up on my feed here, and it has question mark beside it. So if you want to ask a comment or have a comment or ask a question in the chat, you put a question mark in it. I mean, it lets me know what the questions
you could better
are.
see it.
Yes, because at some point they come and go, and it's interesting. Daryl D in the chat talking about a family member which is proving my point. And thank you for the comment, Daryl. Is that his son, was recruited, but he fell in love with the place, not just the coaching staff, and so there's all going around. Anyway,
we don't hate Ross.
I know people
we like to give Ross a hard time. That's
I don't know who's more sensitive, but anyway, everybody takes slings and arrows around.
Especially if you've ever listened to Ross,
I did it on Twitter earlier today. I mean, it's all in fun. Jesus, folks, people go run around clutching pearls and stuff. It's not that serious.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay, let me ask you a chat question. Kelly Johnson, Julian Peterson officially visits this weekend. What are the chances here?
Yeah, so I haven't had a whole lot of chance to chat with Julian because that was just kind of announced a couple hours ago. But I think a lot of this has to do with what Penn State does and how long it takes them to hire a coach and who that coach is. If it's a big splash hire, you got to think that Penn State's going to do a really good job of scooping all these decommitments up pretty quickly. If they drag their feet and botch this hiring process, then yeah, all bets are off. But obviously, getting Julian on campus for a visit is can only be viewed as a positive thing for North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot. You got to get them on campus.
Yeah,
really. And I'm trying to find questions. You said there more questions.
Here's the other thing to keep in mind: when you change coaches, you can a school can now host those players on official visit again. So Julian, who I imagine has took an official visit to Penn State during the offseason, once Penn State hires its coach, can now take a second official visit to Penn State, which yeah. So if these end up being, there's so many variables here, but the assumption for me is I imagine most of these players are going to be desired by Penn State's next head coach. And you got to think that Penn State will have a really good chance of reeling these guys back in, unless, of course, they just completely botch the hiring.
Yeah, I'll let you get out of here. I mean, you're a Penn State or a Pennsylvania guy. Who you want to see coaching there?
I know I'm in a little bit in the minority. I wasn't a huge fan of firing Franklin, and just because the whole, like, I can remember a time when Jim Harbaugh couldn't beat Ohio State, couldn't win the big one, couldn't win a national championship, couldn't win a Super Bowl, and then, he built Michigan into what he did and won a national championship there. So I think that it's very, very hard to win a national championship, and you got to give coaches time. With that said, I mean, I don't know who is Matt Rule is he so much better than James Franklin? I don't think so. So I don't know if there's like a coach out there that's just, to me, going to be just so much better than what James Franklin was. And I actually think I'm not this huge James Franklin fan. I am not. But I think he's going to be in high demand whenever he decides to get back into coaching, whether that's next season or if he wants to take a year or two off.
I mean, they could hire a Stallion and take the Jim Harbaugh route, and then all of a sudden become a great coach.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to let you get out of here. That is Don Callahan. It's been the Noon Dish. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. Ending a little bit early today because Don got things to do. If you're so inclined, join the game plan tonight at 9:30. That is Wednesday night, 9:30 for the game plan. A ton of other content coming up. And of course, Inside Carolina Live ahead of Carolina, California. 10:30 kickoff on the East Coast. Should be an interesting Friday night. But Don, it's always fun, my friend.
Appreciate it, Tommy.